Good evening, everyone. Myself, Grishma Raval, and my topic for today is Proto Romanticism in the mid 18th century with the reference of Gray, Burns, and the cult of emotion. So, these are my table of contents, my academic and presentation details, and my research question asks that what are the major thematic and aesthetic features of proto-romanticism as reflected in the works of Gray and Burns, and how did the cult of emotion and emphasis on sensibility influence the later romantic poets? So the thematic and aesthetic elements which are shown in the works of Gray and Burns are emotional depth, nature, melancholy, and simplicity of expression, which is formed the foundational framework that directly influenced the early romantic poets like William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. So, beginning from my introduction, that how the shift was seen from neoclassicism to proto-romanticism. So, proto-romanticism marks the transition from the order and reason of neoclassicism to the emotion and imagination of romanticism. So the mid 18th century writers, they began to reject the artificial poetic diction which was shown in the starting of the neoclassical era, and they started favoring sincerity, nature, as well as feeling. And it reflected the growing cult of emotion or sensibility which valued tears, sympathy, and human tenderness. And this movement foreshadowed the romantic ideals which were later on developed by Wordsworth, Coleridge, and William Blake. Then, if we move further, then the spirit of age with the cult of emotion and sensibility, there are many influences being shown in the movement going around at that time, where we can see Rousseau's influence, where he is quoting, "Man is born free, but everywhere in chains." This very much inspired the emotional authenticity and natural expression of the poetry at that time. Then sentimentalism comes and the poetry became a medium for empathy, compassion, and human connection. And the literature explored the moral value of emotion and spontaneous feeling over some morality or some higher proper formal form or meter. Then the focus was shifted from public to private experience, and introspection and emotional truth became the artistic ideas during that time. Then now let us come to the first poet of the proto-romantic era who talked about melancholy and reflection in his works, Thomas Gray, whose works and life spanned from 1716 to 1771. He was an English poet and a scholar who was best known for his contemplative and introspective poetry. And his famous work, Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard, this is a 1751 poem which is reflecting on morality, the lives of common people, and the inevitability of death. And he is using the churchyard as a metaphor for life's transience. He is basically showing that whether you are rich, whether you are poor, you have one factor in common, that is death, and you cannot escape from that. We can see the themes of melancholy in his work, where he is emphasizing the dignity of humble lives and the universality of death. And he is also resonating with the romantic ideal of finding beauty in simplicity and sorrow. Then we have another poet of the proto-romantic era, Robert Burns, who talked about emotion, folk spirit, and the common man. And he was a Scottish poet, a lyricist, and he is widely regarded as the national poet of Scotland. And he mostly wrote firstly in Scottish. And he celebrated the common man. His poetry often highlights the lives and emotions of ordinary people, and he is emphasizing their inherent dignity and worth, which I think many of the poets did not. So he was the first one of his kind. And his work, A Red, Red Rose and A Man's a Man for a That, this poem are expressing deep emotional sentiments. In A Red, Red Rose, a shift is seen from romantic love and he's very much beautifully capturing the essence of love in a very pure manner. And in a man for that, he's talking about social equality, and he's showcasing how his range in capturing human emotion is varying than the other poets. Then, if we talk about the thematic and aesthetic features of proto-romanticism, then they talked about emotion over reason, and the poetry began to prioritize emotional expression and personal feeling over rational thought and societal norms. And then we have nature, which was a source of inspiration during that times, and the natural world, which was seen not just as a backdrop but also as a source of emotional and spiritual insight. So this we can see in the works of Thomas Gray majorly. And then we have simplicity and sincerity, which is majorly and prominently being seen in Burns' works, where the writers embraced simple, direct language and the themes that reflected genuine as well as the proper raw and emotions of human experiences in a very pure way. Then the focus on individual experience was also being seen, and a shift was seen towards exploring personal feelings, inner thoughts, as well as individual perspectives. So, in conclusion, if we talk about their legacy and the transition towards romanticism, then Gray and Burns' emphasis on emotion, nature, and individualism paved the way for later romantic poems like Wordsworth and Coleridge. And these themes of emotional authenticity, the sublime in nature, and the dignity of the common person continues to resonate in literature till date in the contemporary times. And their works today as well demonstrate the power of poetry to express deep human emotions, and they connect with the readers across time. My research question and hypothesis are justified because the works of Thomas Gray and Robert Burns mark a vital transitional phase between the neoclassicism and romanticism, and they were the pioneers of the proto-romantic era, and they embodied the spirit of emotional authenticity and individual expression that later on defined the romantic era. And through their treatment of nature, melancholy, and human emotion, they initiated a literary movement that is celebrated worldwide, and a personal feeling over national restraint was the first feature which they highlighted during that time. And Gray's reflective melancholy and Burns' heartfelt simplicity together cultivated what came to be known as the cult of emotion, which paved the way for the romantic ideals of spontaneity, imagination, and the dignity of common human experience. So, thus, proto-romanticism, which is seen in their works, stands not merely as a precursor, but as the essential seed for which the full bloom of romantic poetry emerged later on. I've also made a chart where a comparative analysis and explanation of Thomas Gray and Robert Burns have been done, which showcases the period and context, their major works, their language and style, the treatment of nature of both of the works, and focus on emotion, how they differed and how were they similar, their view of humanity, their proto-romantic traits, their contribution to romanticism, and how they emphasized on sensibility and their tone in the poetry. This is my learning outcome references. Thank you so much. If anybody has any question, feel free to ask.
So the question is how the emotional idea of proto-romanticism be seen in modern literature or film study today?
So, if in contemporary modern times, if we see the films like The Notebook, The Dead Poet Society, they are very much beautifully and magnificently highlighting how they are talking about form, not form, but proper formalism seen in their work, yet they are emotionally connected, and they are talking about sense and also the structured identity of human lives, which is connected to the proto-romanticism era and which is seen in today's contemporary times as well. Anyone else?
So my question is, what might be the dangers or limitations of the cult of sensibility when it becomes too sentimental?
So when the cult of sensibility becomes too sentimental, one might see fractured, fragmented narratives a lot in a personality, and also they might notice a focus on individual sentimentalism more in a negative way, not in a positive way, which also the 18th century critics also highlighted this work and this topic, such as Henry Fielding and also Jane Austen have highlighted this. And Jane Austen, in her work Sense and Sensibility, she talks about this topic. So yeah, if anything too much can harm anyone, so the balance between sensibility and structure should be maintained, otherwise it will temper the balance of literary studies as well as the society. Thank you so much. That is it from my side.